We're here every Tuesday doing the now, the new, and the next in careers. And we have some awesome guests coming on the next few weeks as we go into our symposium. And Dan has agreed to be one of the speakers at our symposium. So thank you so much for joining us, Dan.
Thank you for inviting me to be part of the symposium. It was a really big honor, and the fact that you're coming to my adopted hometown of San Diego makes it even easier. So it's going to be a lot of fun. And, I just found out that Claire Davis, our dear friend, booked her ticket. So I'm even more excited now.
Ah, very exciting. Well, we are chatting, and you're going to present on a little bit more in depth how job seekers and companies are working towards better diversity, how job seekers can navigate the job search process. And that we'll set aside that topic for the symposium. But part of why you're talking about that is that you have a seat on both sides of the table. Tell us a little bit about kind of your recent few years here, the recruiting work you've been doing, as well as where you're at right now in your job search.
So you said a key term, and that's recent, because anybody that knows me or is familiar with my work knows that not only can I talk, but there's so much diversification in the history of how I got to where I am and what I do. But without giving too much away, the talk that I'm giving at the symposium is called the Inclusivity Revolution: A Path to Progress, and really what it speaks to is anecdotally what it's like from the job seeker perspective, whether you're neurodiverse, uh, whether you're part of a minority group, whether you're disabled or otherwise, to go in. How much information do I share? How much do I give away? Will they hold it against me? The uh, do the components of the application that ask for if you have a disability actually come back to haunt you during the interview process, or legally are recruiters even able to see it? And then from the flip perspective, it's, as a recruiter, what actually gets looked at, what is identifiable as a red flag compared to what people would hypothetically assume would be a red flag. And the reality of the situation is I have been on both sides. I currently am a job seeker. I was a job seeker multiple times throughout my life, but I also worked for arguably the largest company in the world uh, as a technical recruiter, but even more focused than that as a DEI program manager, where I was creating resources, where I was creating inclusive uh, processes to guarantee representation within every interview. I was creating furthering education programs. I was creating mentorship programs. I was building relationships with employee resource groups, ERGs. Uh, I was building relationships with alumni associations. I was digging into the depth of what people are actually looking for, and ultimately identifying what the reality of the corporate structure is and how we could actually get to a place of progress.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the trends and the progress that you're seeing and not seeing here in a minute. We've got some folks that are saying hello. So thanks, Darlene. It's good to see you and nice to meet you. And if you're joining us, say hello. Let me know where you're joining from in the chat. And if you're watching the replay, go ahead and drop a chat in there as well with the replay hashtag. And if you have a question for Dan, feel free to put that question in and tag him, even if you're watching the replay, and we'll make sure that we follow up on those. So we've seen nothing but gloom and doom in the headlines recently around tech, with Amazon laying off, Microsoft, Google, I think, it's just been on and on. And tell us, what's the reality? What are you seeing? What's going on in the tech space right now in the job market?
So September 2022, there were 150,000 jobs lost in the tech sector. Then came December, and we saw what happened. Then January came, and that's where I lost my spot. Since that point, we've seen LinkedIn lose some amazing people. Trust me, I know them. We've seen basically every major tech company has gone through. Now, the reality of the situation is that for a lot that are out there, this moment in time is a waiting game. And that's the hardest part for me. That's the hardest part for everybody else, because we really don't identifiably know when things are going to get better. There's different thought processes as far as, are they going to start hiring in Q2? Are they going to start hiring in Q3? And people don't have an infinite amount of money. I'm still in debt from the pandemic. I don't have that bankroll that I did. And even those that weren't in debt the way that I was, if they lost their job as a result of the pandemic, their funds became depleted just pushing through. And then the second wave hits and there's not as much cushion. It's an incredibly scary time, and it's something that I go through every day, and it's something that I use my platform to normalize the conversations on. And there's so much uncertainty out there. And with uncertainty comes a lot of arguments, and those arguments are, which is the best way to job search, which is the best way to find openings. And the truth of the matter is, in a market like we have today, if you're going to stay in the tech sector, and that's a really important component of it, there's ways that may conventionally be preferred that people like myself and other experts would push you to, but nobody could sit here and say that there's one definitive way to do something, that one way is 100% better than the other, because if they are, then they're losing sight of the overall economics of what's going on.
Well, and job search is always that way. I always encourage my coaches that although people want an answer, it's really an experiment and it's trial and error. And there isn't one way that's going to work for any one person. And it tends to be like a thing where you do all these actions and then something comes out of it that you wouldn't have expected. So I always tell people to have a balanced job search, right? Apply and everything, but we don't want to get too deep into that. So we've seen this tech sector layoffs. We've
Yeah.
read, and I've read some things that say other industries want those tech people. Now, that might be true, but what the situation you're in is a little bit different because you're in the, I don't want to say support functions, but you're not a programmer, right? You're not a developer, you're not a project manager. You're on the other side in
Yes, I
deep
am.
dive program management. And so I've wondered, what about those folks? Because they're not going to get these positions from other industries that have been looking for tech talent.
That's not 100% accurate, and I say that respectfully. Uh, I came from healthcare, so before I was a recruiter, I was a healthcare uh, project program manager in for clinical research organizations supporting clinical trials across the globe with some of the largest companies. Uh, the thing about tech is, people look at tech as being FANG. It's much more than that. It's grossly more than that. And the thing about tech is, tech permeates every part of society, every company. In clinical trials, in order to retain uh, the trial participants, things like applications were built to keep engagement. Things like the food industry, everything that you do from a marketing perspective is brought back to some system that was created by tech engineers. So the truth and the reality of the situation is that, while yes, software development engineers, programmers, front end, back end, whatever the case may be, are going to be at the forefront of that poll. And by the way, going into healthcare and some of these other fields is not taking a step down financially. If you look at companies, and I'm reticent to name names, but like if you look at Pfizer is billion dollar backed. You're not gonna see a gross reduction in salary. Uh, but these people, when they're able to find program and product managers that are coming from this space, then that have worked with this, I'm not going to call it higher level talent, because that would be disrespectful to the people already in there. But there's a more linear aptitude to work with those software development engineers and those other techies that are going over there. So I think that there is going to be a demand across the board. I just think that a lot of people that are coming from these higher level companies may need to move, if possible, and I say if possible for personal reasons, um, to companies that may be well-funded startups or mid-markets or mid-size, so on and so forth.
Yeah, and there is a lot of opportunity, but it's, as you're saying, going to require some shift, but maybe not the shift people expect. I love that you said the salary may not change just because you're leaving Bang. There's so many other opportunities that may pay just as well. And obviously opportunities that may not pay as well or may not pay as stably if you're talking about a startup, depending on the stage of the startup, it may pay well, but it may not be as stable, or some of that payment may not be liquid, right? If it's coming in other forms. So you're seeing both the kind of hands-on tech talent as well as the program managers, product managers, and even like marketing staff are still going to have those same opportunities in other sectors, is what you're saying.
They very much are. Um, it's an interesting dynamic because a lot of people make the assumption that when they switch industries, it's going to be this gross change. But for developers and others that are doing the back end work, they're not going to see a tremendous amount of difference in their day to day. Now, program managers, project managers will, because using the example I just gave, going from tech software development to healthcare is a very, very, very different animal. And we need to be aware of those. And this is where, as you're doing the job search, as you're creating your target list of companies, you should be doing the research and identifying not just which companies you want to work for, especially if they're in a different field, but what trainings can you take that are going to best prepare you so that when you do step in, you don't have as far to go. I got very lucky because right before I went to Amazon, I was the regional manager for a healthcare software development company that was focused with electronic master file software. Basically, what that means is, and every clinical trial has a bunch of paperwork. This is just where a repository for all of that electronically. So I got to understand the software development lifecycle, and that coupled with the LinkedIn learning courses that I took and some other and Coursera and all that other kind of stuff were very influential and supplemental in creating a supplemental base of knowledge that allowed me to adjust more quickly. Now, I will say, and this is just personal, um, and at the risk of alienating myself from future opportunities, you have to make a personal decision as far as what you want to open yourself up to. With what I've done with diversity, equity, inclusion, with the programs that I've built, with the conversations that I've had, I'm looking to stay in a high visibility sector. Now, that isn't because I have some ego. It's because I understand that my place as a white anti-racist, as an abolitionist, and the background that I have doors that I could open. And if I do it at a firm that has high visibility, then that means that I could potentially be setting an example for those to come. And that's ultimately my goal, to make global change. So I say this to say that we all have a very individual and very, very personal choice to make. And we really have to work through that and trust that what we're doing is best for ourselves and our families.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're gonna go a little bit further into the diversity conversation, but I'd love to hear in the chat, what do you see is going in the tech sector? Are your clients that are in coming out of the tech sector or FANG type companies, where are they landing? Let's give each other some ideas of other types of companies or industries that these job seekers are transitioning to, so that we could share that. So if you're working with that population or seeing some even friends and family from that industry moving into other industries or different types of companies, I'd love to see what you're seeing. What are some of those trends? So Dan, as we move into talking about diversity, this is how you and I met. So we met through some clubhouse rooms focused on diversity, trying to learn, trying to position ourselves to be of use, right? To learn, obviously, first, to learn and then to be of use in the world and furthering diversity and inclusion initiatives. But you have an awesome platform. You've just done so much work in that space. What do you see are some of the good changes that have happened, and then what's still left to do? Lots left to do, but what are some of the top things you see coming next in making the world a better place in terms of diversity and inclusion?
That's a really difficult question, and I'm probably not going to give as positive an answer as I would like to, but I think we have to look back and first say that for many, DEI is considered anti-Black. And the reason that it's considered anti-Black is because we saw a spike in DEI programs when George Floyd was killed. Although, just to be straight, that was just one instance of many, many, many instances over time. And since that point, companies have been quick to create positions focused on diversity, equity, inclusion. They've been quick to create programs that are based on diversity, equity, inclusion, but the vast majority, the gross majority of them that I've seen have been a sticker that they could place on their on their shirt, much like I voted after an election. The truth of the matter is that a lot of the trainings that occur in corporate, a lot of the diversity trainings are actually alienating those in the minority BIPOC community. It's almost a sense of trauma porn because they're forcing these employees to go through trainings on microaggressions and other things that are their lived experience, and it creates a very difficult situation. And the reality is that the current economic climate, the current corporate structure is doing exactly what it was set out to be. It was set out to do, and that is to create a system of comfort so that nobody feels the need to push it in one direction or the other. If I, I've done multiple polls, and when you ask recruiters, what's the number one reason um, that they don't hire for diversity, it's the overwhelming answer was because it's not part of their job description, which goes to speak to why are there no checks and balances? Why is it even why do we even question who and where we should be recruiting from? I look at things like job descriptions and basic qualifications, and it's all geared towards those that are advantaged. So you asked, where do we go from here? What are the positives? How can we make changes? Uh, First and foremost, let's clear the air on something. Diversity, equity, inclusion is just not right. It's not just race. It's disability. It's neurodiversity. It has so many different components that consist of it. And what we need to do is we need sorry, this is a little bit hard for me to talk about because it's a very, very personal subject for me. Um, we have to get to a point where we're able to help narrow the gender and racial wealth gap through equity, but equity for the people that are in charge, for the 2%, for those white individuals at the top of Fortune 5s. Because right now, here's data for you. There's only 6 Black CEOs of Fortune 5s. I'm going to change my background real quick because I think it's going to be able to provide a little bit of perspective while we're talking.
Yeah.
This was my background for Black History Month, and you could see all the data behind me for for the gender and racial wealth gap. You could see how much Latina make compared. You could see how much the average wife makes compared to their husband, and it's just grossly unfair. The problem is that equity, in order to change the top 2%'s mind, you need to show that it's equitable for them to do so. which is a horrible thing to say because it should be the right thing to do. But you have to show the data so that equitably it says to them, okay, well, we need to pay uh, Latina Latino more. We need to pay Black folk more. We need to pay Indigenous people more. We need to pay mothers more and get it to that point, because if we do, then we're going to get higher levels of productivity. Our sales are going to go skyrocketed. But it's really hard to identify that data. And it's even harder to convince a system built to suppress that there should be KPI measurements implemented that doesn't just keep the recruiters accountable, but it keeps their managers and their managers and their managers accountable with real world consequences.
Well, and
So it's
we've
loaded.
seen some of those things come and go, right? I mean, in California,
Yeah.
where you are, they had a law for a little bit, if I'm not speaking incorrectly here, there was a law that companies had to have a certain amount of women on their board, and then I think it only lasted maybe a year, and then it was taken away, right? So it's just some of those little case studies show us how hard it is to make little changes at an institutional level.
Yeah. And first of all, thank you for putting me in there, because I was going run on, and I mean that. Thank you. Here's the thing that you'll see from a micro level, you'll see individual organizations that do an amazing job of trying to build out these programs, of trying to get behind. But from a macro level, from the C-suite leadership, that's where they run into issues. Uh, it's tremendously sad. And uh, if more people that look like me don't take the initiative to do the work and to open the doors, then it's going to stay that way. It needs to be a collective effort.
Right, and that's been part of the challenges with some of the efforts that people have made, and it's their efforts. They're putting in the effort, but I know that people have talked about the employee resource groups, the struggle, as you're saying, the DEI program be a struggle because how they're managed, how they're implemented, can be almost more detrimental sometimes, is what if I think I heard you say. And then also there's new trends that I almost see, people hope that they're going to be an easy button towards diversity. When we talk about skills-based hiring, it's like, oh, that'll diversify our applicant pools. Or we talk about, even remote work will diversify the applicant pools. Or we were talking about something else. I don't remember what it was, but there's these structures. Oh, the salary transparency.
Yeah,
And in
that's a
some
big one.
ways, those are, I mean, they're good, but when we see them as an easy button, they almost are bad, because then we're not putting in the real effort that you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the easy button. The thing I hate most on LinkedIn is the easy apply. Well, it's one of the things I hate most, because when we do that, it gets us into really bad habits of going down certain paths, and it makes us feel like we're creating progress when we're really not. There's so much that you brought up. Which one do you want me to address? Because we talk about transparency, we talk about all these different things, just in order to remain focused. Which area do you want to touch on?
Well, we were talking about salary transparency
Oh,
in a LinkedIn conversation back and forth. So let's just talk about that one briefly. I know Marvin Smith, who's one of our other presenters at the symposium, is going to talk a little bit about skills-based hiring as well. But there was some data that recently came out from Harvard University, I think, or Harvard Business Review, that said salary transparency was improving pay equity for women. What's your response to that?
it's not. So here's it, or maybe it is on a micro level. I don't have the data to back me up, but let me give you a quick analogy. When So my wife, love her to death. She helped with the fight for 15. So the minimum wage being $15 an hour, and even at $15 an hour, people were still under the poverty threshold. But people pushed back at the fight for 15. Now, the reason that people pushed back at the fight for 15 is the same reason that the pay transparency I don't feel is enough. Like, do I think it's a good notion at first? I'm 75% yes. I'm probably 25% no, and that's for varying reasons. But my point of it is that not every company is going to be able to afford to pay uh, a comparative rate to other companies. Not every company is going to feel the pressure, the peer pressure to say, okay, well, now that everybody can see what I'm doing, I need to up my game. There's paid transparency only goes as far as base salary. You have other things like benefits. You have a whole bunch that's outside of that you're still not going to get to see. So it will only go so far. And there is no there's no easy button for this. There's no let's press and make this all better. It has to be a collective effort on all sides, and that's the reason that we haven't been able to do it as a society for this long, because you're never going to get everybody on the same page to do it because everybody has different interests.
Well, and when it comes right down to it, we're all fairly self-interested, right? And it takes a lot of processing and learning and thinking and checking yourself constantly to do what you're doing in a way that is moving the needle in the right direction, right?
Yeah.
Because when you come from that place of privilege, and in that definition of white privilege, when we come from that place of privilege, and all of us in some ways have some privilege, right? We've all got those areas, whether that's diversity or sorry, I didn't mean diversity, I meant neurodiversity or disability or socioeconomic status. When you look across the board, we all have areas of privilege and areas where we don't have privilege. But of course, when you're talking about white privilege, is pretty obvious and it's very visible. And it's something that people have a hard time with, that concept. And then I think, especially in America, we've seen over the last 10 years a huge challenge with us just feeling like everything is a pie, right? And if you have a slice, that means that I'm having less. And when we start to get that kind of territorial, or I don't know what the right word is, but when we start, I call it, abundance thinking versus not abundance thinking. But when you get out of that place of, if you have some, that doesn't take away from what I have, I just see that more and more Americans, especially, going towards that. And that gets in the way of any kind of any of these conversations, because we are going to position ourselves to keep what we think we need. And then if we see it as a pie, we're automatically trying to keep someone else away from things because that's going to take away what we need. I don't know if that made any sense.
It did. And the other thing I would add to that, it's also work. We don't teach the real history of America in school. I'm very open about that. We don't teach the true details of the European Revolution. We teach a version that is meant to make us look good as a nation, to make our forefathers look good. And when you bring that up from a diversity perspective, what that means is that for us to create corrective action, it takes an immense amount of work. It doesn't just take schools. Schools could be as open and diligent as they want to, but if that information is not backed when those children get home from their parents, then it falls by the wayside because the number one source of a child, the emulation, is their parents. And as a father of twin girls, parenting is a lot of work. So now you're telling me, well, now I have to fix the education system that I'm paying X amount to send my children into. It's just so it's so complicated, but it's also the genius of how our country was built. Because I said it before and I'll say it again, and I don't mean to smile. I'm smiling more out of annoyance than anything. But the structure that we currently have in place is exactly the way the structure was meant to be, and it's not okay.
Yeah, and it's a big thing to change, and like you said, it starts with each of us individually taking action, and I have 2 I have 2 little boys, and the same thing. How do you teach them that? How do you teach them to be part of the society in a way that brings value? And, I'm just so excited to have you, to get to meet you in person since we've
I
been
know.
clubhousing and everything for 18 months or so. Just excited to get to meet you in person. And I know you're going to talk through what we were talking about earlier, some of the job search topics and how people can help how they can help their clients. And then I know we'll also have a diversity part to our conversation. How can we help our job seekers who are butting up against some of these different challenges, additional challenges on top of just the normal job search challenges. So I'm excited to hear about that. I'm excited to meet you, and I just want to thank you again for taking the time to do this and taking the time to come and meet with us in March. So, what would you say to someone who's thinking about coming to the symposium? Why are you so excited?
Well, first let me say that one of my best friends in the world, her name is Jen Buck, is watching right now. She's recovering from an accident yesterday, and she was been one of my primary mentors when it comes to professional speaking. And she told me, Dan, the best thing that you could do is tell a story, because a story is what the audience will get wrapped up in. So when you come to the symposium, and I'm speaking on the 29th at 3:30 p.m. Pacific, I believe I'm the last speaker, actual like individual speaker at the event. Before, I know there's a panel right after me. That's what you're going to get. You're going to be brought the best that I can into that world of being that job seeker, and but also being in that role where you're making the decisions. It's my job to put you in those shoes and give you an opportunity to walk around so that you better understand what it is from both perspectives. Now, as far as why you should come to the symposium, one, with respectfully, it is one of the nicest areas you will ever be at. I was telling Marie, my wife and I go to Bali High, which is a restaurant right across from there, and they have the strongest Mai Tais in the country. So if you're a Mai Tai drinker, I see you cringing right now. I shouldn't have said that, but
No,
that's okay.
I like my
But you know, even more than that, there's an opportunity to listen to some of the most amazing speakers and minds that you're going to meet. I look at people like Kate Pozesnik, who has given so many hundreds of hours of her time to people to provide advice. I look at the entire registry of speakers, and it's just such an amazing delight to be able to participate. There are there are events that you go to because you want to go to an event, and then there's events that you go to because you know that the people leading it, that the speakers working it, are going to give you so much value that you're going to come away on a higher plane a different person. And truly, that's what you're doing. That's what you've created, Marie. And that's why ultimately I'm so excited. And if you want no other reason, come meet us in person. I'll be around. This is where I live, and I'll give you plenty of recommendations. We got wine country out here, we got beer country out here, some fantastic spots. So please get in, come in, sign up for the VIP. And if I remember correctly, it is not being recorded. So if you miss it, you miss it.
Right. Yeah, we're an intimate group. We have our speakers do things like you're saying, where it's going to be very engaging, and those things you just can't reproduce via video. So it's an in-person event, it's an immersive event, and we really enjoy that. We do so many other virtual things throughout the year that this is just a special time to connect in person.
Yeah. And one last thing I'll say, because I have such a large audience, uh, most of you know me to be somewhat loud and boisterous and not shut up. I'll tell you straight up, in person, I'm about as quiet as can be. So if you're coming in, expecting Chris Farley, you're probably not, you're probably going to be a little bit disappointed. But I will be there, happy to answer any questions that have come from this particular conversation or otherwise. The only other thing I would say leading up to it is there's plenty of International Women's Day events coming up if you're
Mhm.
interested in DEI and women's empowerment, so on and so forth.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna have to send me the data for that mothers earn 58 cents per dollar, because I see a lot of talk right now about, putting motherhood on your resume. Always makes me cringe because I also share research. It's getting a little old now, but talks about how mothers, especially even more than women in general, see that motherhood penalty. And that's a challenge, just another challenge that we have to overcome in addition to all the others. So I really
That's
appreciate you, Dan.
Yeah, that's another conversation. I'll tell you, and I know you want to wrap up. When my wife is coming back from maternity leave, they called her up and said, "We don't actually have a place for you to breastfeed, for you to pump." So they wound up clearing out a closet for her and putting a chair. And I was so horrified. I've never gotten so close to going in and yelling at somebody at my wife's work in my life. But these are things we have to get better with.
Yes, definitely, definitely. Well, I can't wait to meet you. Thank you so much for joining me, and we will see you on the 29th. If you're joining us for the symposium, the room rate ends on the 24th of February. So if you want to have a room at the Kona Kai, you want to get in before the 24th. Thanks so much, Dan, and I will talk to you again soon.
Bye.